Good morning, Year 4. Yesterday we looked at hundredths and tenths and looking at what they looked like on a hundred square. And the reason that we looked at hundredths and tenths in particular is because we're going to be moving on to decimals now. But before we do that, I just want to show you the place value grid. So we know that every time we move a column to the left, we get 10 times bigger. So let's start with our ones column. I know it says units here, but we call them ones. So these are your ones. And then when we multiply 1 by 10, we get 10. Then when we multiply 10 by 10 again, we get 100. And when we've got 100 and we multiply that by 10, we get 1,000. Which means that every time we go this way, we get 10 times smaller. 10 times smaller than 1,000 is 100. 10 times smaller than 100 is 10. 10 times smaller than 10 is 1. But then what happens when you want to get 10 times smaller than 1? You split it into tenths. And then if you want to get 10 times smaller than a tenth, you then break it into hundredths. So that is a place value grid. And we're going to be looking at this in more detail now. So here's one I've got, or here's one I prepared earlier. So we know that, this fraction is 8 out of 100. So we know it's 8 hundredths. So to turn that into a decimal, we need to look at our place value grid. We don't have any tens. We don't have any ones, because if this was covered in, then we would have one whole one. We don't even have any tenths, do we? Because the only tenth that has got some counts on is this one, but it's not full. So we don't have any ones. We don't have any tenths. But we do have 8 hundredths. So fractions and decimals, I always say that they are twins, but they're not identical, but they do the same thing. So fractions and decimals arise when you don't have a whole number. So they are things that are in between whole numbers. For example, if we were counting up and we were going 1, 2, 3, 4, they're all whole numbers. But if we wanted to count in halves, we'd go 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5. Or we could say 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3. So fractions and decimals do exactly the same thing, but they look different. So 8 hundredths is the same as 0.08. Let's look at another one. So my last one was 8 hundredths, and I'm now going to add 2 hundredths. 1 hundredth, 2 hundredths. So altogether now, I've got 10 hundredths, which is the same as 1 whole tenth. Now, if I wanted to turn that into a decimal, it's actually very simple. I don't have any tens and I don't have any ones because this is not covered in. Now, I could put a 0 in the tens, but I already know there's no tens because I've already put a 0 here, so it doesn't matter. I don't need to put anything in the tens column. You can if you want to, and it won't be wrong, but there's no need. And then you can see we've got 1 whole tenth. Now, here's the thing. You can decide whether you put a 0 there, because you could say, oh, it's 0.1, or you could say it's 0.10, because you can either say 10 hundredths or 1 tenth. Most people, though, would just leave the 0 and just say 0.1. So let's have a look at what happens when we add some more hundredths. Let's add 5 more hundredths. So now we've got 15 hundredths. And once again, it doesn't matter. Once again, it doesn't matter about the ones column because we know that we're not going to fill this in. So it's not a whole one, so it's always going to be 0 point something. So we've got 1 whole tenth coloured in. So we've got 1 whole tenth. And then here, we've got 5 hundredths. So you could say that 15 hundredths is the same as 0.15 or 0.15. Whichever way you say it is absolutely fine. We've got a bigger decimal number now. We still don't have a whole one, so it's going to be 0. You can see that we've coloured in 99 out of 100 altogether. So 99 hundredths as a decimal would be 0.99. You can see we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 whole tenths. And then we've got 9 hundredths. Now, if I just added 1/100th here, then that would change everything. We've now got 1 whole one. We would have, because we added 100th there, and we were on 99 already, now we would have 100 hundredths, which is the same as 10 tenths, which is exactly the same as 1 whole one. So we would just write that like this, 1. You could write it 1.00. You could even write it as 1.00000000 if you wanted to, but there's no need. Mathematicians are lazy. They don't need to do that. So let's have a look at some place value counters now. So now we're going to look at some place value counters and what these look like on a place value grid. So once again, we've got our place value grid here, and we've got tens, ones, tenths, and then hundredths. So we're going to make some numbers. So they're my tenths. Can you think what number this might be? I've got 4 tenths, no whole ones, got no hundredth. So this number would be 0.4 because the 4 is in my tenths column. Let's keep going. How would you say this number? That would be 0.6. Let's add some hundredths now. How would you say this number? This would now be 0.64 because I've got 6 tenths and I've got 4 hundredths. I still don't have a whole one. How would I say this number? I've got no whole ones still. I've got 9 tenths and I've got 9 hundredths, 0.99. So here's a question for you. What would happen now if I added 1 more hundredth? how would this number change? Let's have a look. Well, you'll automatically notice that I've got 10 in one column. And the biggest number that I can have in a column is 9. So what do I need to change now? I'll need to exchange all of these for one of these. So I'll need to exchange 10 hundredths for 1 tenth. So let's get rid of these now. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We'll get this one. Wait a minute, I've got 10 in there now, but I can't have 10. The biggest I can have is 9. So what I'll need to do now is exchange 10 tenths for 1 whole one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. So as soon as you get to after 0.99 and you add another hundredth, then you'll make 1 whole one. Now, you don't need to put a decimal point in, but if you really wanted to, you could write 1 like this. You could have 1 like this. All that's saying is you've got 1 whole one, no tenths, and no hundredths. If you really wanted to, you could tell the person that you don't have any tens, that you don't have any hundreds, and you could really tell them that you don't have any thousands, but it's just a big waste of time. So all we need is the 1. So today you are going to be looking at fractions and decimals, and you're going to be looking very closely at the relationship between fractions and decimals. And for lots of the activities, what you'll need to do is you will need to convert between fractions and decimals just like this. But you will be looking at hundredths and you will be looking at tenths as well. So have a go. The maths learning that you've been uploading to Seesaw for the past 2 weeks has been absolutely phenomenal. Your understanding with fractions was fantastic, and I'm hoping the same for decimals as well. So good luck today, guys.